Late in 1963, the Pershing ballistic missile was proved operational. This was no minor happening. It meant that America's ground forces had a new, farther-reaching, faster-firing, and harder-hitting weapon. Nuclear firepower with greater mobility and reliability. It took a lot of doing. But 1964 is the year in which Pershing joins the ranks. Early 1960, test firings of the Pershing missile are begun at the Atlantic Missile Range. The Army's Missile Command research and developers faced many problems, but they knew what they wanted, a weapon to replace and outperform the justly famed Redstone, America's first satellite launcher. Before it ever lifted from a firing stand, the new configuration was tested for aerodynamic stability. It would have to fly true for a range of 400 miles and be strong enough to endure the shocks and vibrations of flight at more than a mile a second, carrying a nuclear warhead of awesome power. Every component of the system had to be able to move fast anywhere, on the ground or by airlift, so it had to be light as well as rugged. The Pershing had to be able to function in virtually any extreme of climate. The steaming heat of the hot chamber, the frost of the cold chamber. These were research tools which helped to ensure that the system would have that ability. Freedom anywhere on Earth demands a system that can be delivered anywhere on short notice. So Pershing's dimensions had to be tailored for air transport, both rotary and In May 1963, the U.S. Army Test and Evaluation Command prepared final test plans for the conduct of joint or integrated engineering service tests of the Pershing missile system. Two subordinate commands of the Test and Evaluation Command would conduct the tests: the U.S. Army Artillery Board, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico. Working together, the two agencies would telescope time, performing both service and engineering tests with the same series of shots. The 2nd Battalion, 44th Artillery, carried out the actual test operations. It became their job to demonstrate just how well the Pershing could take the kind of punishment it would receive on the battlefield, and how well it could hit back. All of this was in preparation for further operations, including a series of 13 live firings in which missiles would fly from Waco Range, Fort Bliss, Texas, Black Mesa, Utah, and Fort Wingate, New Mexico, to land on White Sands Missile Range. These off-range firings were necessary. No inland range is 400 miles long, and Pershing takes that kind of elbow room.
These missiles will land only where we want them.
For a full year before the overland shoots, the Army put intensive effort into a public information program to explain the need for them and to make clear the almost total lack of danger from them.
The sergeant test will run for a month or so, the Pershing series for several months to a year, and the Air Force...
At the Capitol building in Salt Lake City, Army officials explained the proposed program to Governor George D. Clyde of Utah. And in Santa Fe, capital of neighboring New Mexico, the story was brought to the office of Governor Jack M. Campbell. Both governors endorsed the off-range firing program, quickly recognizing the need for more space to test long-range missiles. White Sands Missile Range is an ideal impact area. It has the instrumentation to collect the maximum of flight data. Its wide open areas of dry land make it possible to locate and recover missile parts after impact. And its inland location makes it easier to enforce security measures. A major phase of the Army's information campaign was to make clear to the public just why overland firings are safe. First, no one is allowed inside a safety zone around the firing site. The missile's booster stage falls within this area. Second, if radar and other tracking gear indicate the missile is straying from its predetermined course, a signal is sent out which destroys the missile in flight before it can get out of the safety zone. Third, once it's properly launched, a ballistic missile, like a bullet, follows a set trajectory in accordance with the laws of physics. Unlike an aircraft, it cannot fall to the ground while in ballistic flight. Fourth, all test missiles carry dummy warheads. August of 1963 found the Army missilemen convoying the Pershing from Fort Sill to a Fort Bliss firing site. Everything was set for the first overland test of the missile system. The 600-mile trip, or road march, took 2 days and was in itself a practical test of how the system stood up under the jolting of extended travel. Along the way, the Pershing system's own radio set was used for communications with Fort Sill and within the convoy of 185 vehicles, which stretched 50 miles from front to rear. The initial research was over. At the end of this 600-mile trek lay the beginning of the firing series, which would prove that the Pershing was ready to take its vital place in America's arsenal of ground-to-ground missiles. The plan was this. From a firing site 20 miles south of White Sands Missile Range, 2 missiles would be fired at a target inside the range. The trajectory of each missile would cover more than 100 miles. At White Sands, scores of special missile tracking instruments were ready to collect and record for study information on flight performance. The development of these complex and extremely precise instruments, both optical and electronic, was pioneered largely at White Sands itself. They were to save much time and money by cutting down the number of firings needed to collect full information for evaluating missile performance. At the Fort Bliss firing site, south of White Sands, all operations were carried out under near tactical conditions. There were 400 men in the firing and evaluation team, and there was plenty to keep every man busy, for this had to be done against the clock, and it had to be done right. Here, for the first time under field conditions, they were doing the things they had practiced and re-practiced for so long. Now the practice was paying off. By dawn of 20 August, they were ready to fire the first missile of the test series. A few days later, the second missile flew its precise 100-mile arc to land right on target inside the White Sands range. The test series was off to a good start. And with these shorter first flights, the stage was set for the long-range shoots. Soon, the troops were on their way to the Black Mesa firing site near Blanding, Utah. More than 600 miles, 2.5 days, with the nights spent in the open. It was a far cry from the wagon trains that blazed the trails through this country, but the country itself is little changed. When the convoy reached Blanding, Utah, the local citizens turned out to catch the excitement. They hadn't seen so many strangers since the last deer hunting season. Here again, it was a sagebrush headquarters. Conditions for both men and equipment were kept as nearly tactical as possible. What with the long road march, establishing the site, and setting up the system against the clock, at least one common combat condition, physical weariness, was shared by all. The 5 missiles of this series were to impact at various points on the White Sands Range, some 300 to 400 miles to the southeast of Black Mesa, 3 to 4 times the range of the first 2 shots. The few people living within the safety zone were notified well in advance, and Army personnel was assigned to make their brief evacuation as comfortable and convenient as possible. A concentrated effort was made to brief citizens on the Pershing operations. Business and civic groups learned details of the necessity and safety of the firings, and once informed, came through with both interest and wholehearted support. For some Indian groups, the briefing was presented in their native tongue. There is a new Indian word, Pershing. Meanwhile, the program went forward. This man is a flight safety officer, the man directly responsible for the public safety during the missile flights. This radar plotting board is a basic tool of his trade. As the Pershing hurtles through space, pens will trace its course and show where it would hit if the button were pressed to destroy it in flight. Both high-precision tracking radar and a Doppler system follow every move of the speeding missile. Far away at White Sands Missile Range, this electronic brain receives and analyzes data from the tracking gear and instantly feeds signals back to the plotting board, which you just saw at the firing site. 24 September 1963. Soon the first of the 5 long-range shots will be triggered from Black Mesa. For the first time, a Pershing would be fired over land at a target more than 300 miles away. At roads and highways entering the safety zone, traffic is stopped briefly during the time of firing. Motorists are given specially prepared information booklets explaining why they're being stopped and the purpose and importance of this series of Pershing tests. Under tactical conditions, there is no countdown blaring from loudspeaker systems. All communications are done in quiet, unhurried tones by team members wearing earphone sets. Maximum silence is the rule, just as in combat. At White Sands, the missile tracking instruments are manned and ready. The Army provides a viewing stand for visitors, including members of the press from all over the nation. Those few living within the safety zone temporarily leave their homes to areas outside the zone until the shoot is over. In addition, shortly before firing, a thorough search of the safety zone is made, making sure that no one has been overlooked. Finally,